Hello and welcome to Polyplane.com. I'm Gabe Matthews. Thanks for coming by as we continue on with the Intro to Rendering series. We're on to part 7 now, setting up the scene. So let's dive right in. So as we talked about in the last 6 videos, there's about 5 different elements that we need to take in consideration. These are the environment, lighting, objects, material, and camera. And I've decided for this rendering series, we're just going to use the chair from the sketch to model video, just because it is a fairly decent model and it renders well as far as making interesting highlights. So I figure it's a try rendering and seeing how it comes out. But in order to do that, we need to set up the scene. So we need to take into consideration what we're doing. Now, I'm planning on showing you how to render this in both V-Ray and KeyShot. So the process of setting up the scene is a little bit different in each, but for our purposes for this video, we're just going to do it in Rhino and V-Ray. And then when I actually do the renderings in the following video, we'll actually go through and I'll show you how to set up the back plates, the illumination settings for KeyShot. So anyway, what I've done is I've broken out all of the different components into their respective parts and pieces. So we've got the wheels, we've got the legs, we've got the tilt lock mechanism, the base, the sides, and the cushions. I've created an additional layer here in my layers palette called environment. What we're going to do is we're going to actually use a photo of an office, and we're going to use that as sort of our guidelines for how we want this thing to align itself in the final render. In Rhino, you can actually just right click on perspective, go to viewport properties and bring up the prompt, and then there's a wallpaper option, and I'm just gonna import my my wallpaper, which is this photograph of an office. And I'm actually going to turn off the grid, and you just go into document properties and go to grid and turn off the show grid lines, axis, and world axis icon. And it gives you a nice clean background to work against. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on a shaded view so we can kind of figure out the scale of this thing and just kind of get it roughed into position here. We're going to adjust the camera angles in a minute, but what I want to do is make sure that it kind of reads correctly in the space. So we might want to tilt it in, make it a little more dynamic, and you can see that part of that leg in the background is actually in some of the light that's going to cast across that leg. So I have a trick for that, and I'm going to do it in Photoshop as a post thing to show where that light might hit. And the reason I'm doing that is because for me to match the physical sky, I'd be better off just modeling this entire space and then putting a light through that window. So part of my whole philosophy is if you can do it quicker for communication purposes, you're gonna wind up saving time and money. So that's kind of where I've pretty much got it right where I want it. I'm just kind of panning and tilting and rotating the camera just to get it just right. This photograph looks like it was taken with maybe a 35mm lens, and right now my viewport is set to 30, and I'm just going to match what I think it might be. So it's 35mm, and you won't really see much of a big difference based on the angles and lines of the space. But if I were to say go to a 10mm lens, for instance, and then try to scale it out, you can see what's happening is it's becoming wildly distorted and a little bit extreme and dramatic of an angle. What I want to do is just kind of bring it back to 30mm. And just a quick tip in Rhino, you can undo view changes just by hitting home, the home key on your keyboard, and that'll bring it back to where it was. So I think that looks pretty good. So we need to save this view. And in Rhino, what you'll do is right click on perspective or whatever your viewport window is, set view, name views, and then save. And we're just going to call the main shot 1. This will be the one we use for the composite. I'm going to do a couple more views that don't include this background plate. Those are going to be just detail shots. Do it here. So we've got our main shot. Now the thing of it is if I were to render this right now and there's no lights, nothing's going on in the scene to kind of inform the camera of what's going on, It's probably going to be just a white model render. So if I click the render globe here, it's going to give me this small little dinky window. You know, you can't really see anything that's going on. It's just a white model, and the general illumination in the space is kind of informing some of the ambient occlusion that you're seeing in that truss work of the sides of the chair. We've got sort of our environment set up. I want to do one more thing, and that's to put in a ground plane. It's just going to capture the shadows, and we're going to wind up removing it later, but it's it'll make sense why I did that in a second. We'll render just those two views, the chair as it is, and then with the ground plane, and that way we can extract the shadows to put onto the carpet. So okay, we've got our environment, we've got our backplate, happy with the shot. The next thing in our build list is we need to add in some lighting. In V-Ray for Rhino 4, I'm in like version 1.056 or something silly. Let me see here. Yeah, so for the last one, it was 1.05.29. Anyway, they're up to like version 2 now, so there are a lot of different options have changed. But what I'm getting at is in this particular version, back when ASGVIS handled stuff, they came out with this great set of tools. So I have a materials palette that I can click on, the levels of quality, and studio scenes. And I'm going to use these just so you can kind of see what happens. We're going to get rid of these for a second and just go to the environment, because when I click on, this is probably good for a medium scene. What it did is it automatically populated the space with this big Thunderdome looking studio space, and inside of it are 3 lights that are already included, and these are pretty good, only I do a couple of things. So not only did it bring those things in, but they brought them onto their respective layers. I'm gonna go ahead and delete that that bowl because we don't need it, and I'm gonna unlock the lights, and I'm gonna delete the center light because I find that it's often too bright, and we're trying to mimic the space, the lighting that's already in the space. One thing we want to do is rotate those lights about 90 degrees, and then go back and reset our main shot here. And so now if I were to click the render globe, you can start to see some more shadows. Again, there's a big thing here. We're getting a little tiny bit of shadow here. I might amplify some of the properties of the light that's on the left side of it here. But what we've created is we've got our basic environment all set up, and now we've got some lights in there and we can tweak them. Looking at it from this top view here, I'm going to say that this light on its left side, we're going to rotate that around just a little bit so that the shadows are truly being cast kind of matching where the window is. And then I'm also going to come into the light palette here and increase that up to like a multiplier of 8 and warm up the color just a little bit. So come in here and make it a little more yellow because I'm assuming it's daylight that's coming through that window. And then we'll leave this other light alone where it is, so we can relock that layer. So let's set up a couple different shots that kind of explore the detail. Maybe we'll do a leg shot here, so maybe something like this shot right here. That looks pretty good, so we'll save that view. And I'm kind of jumping around here, and I apologize, but I'm just trying to cover all the bases here. We'll call this leg shot 1 and save that, and then maybe a shot right here so that you get a nice view of the metal sides and the cushion itself. So we'll call this cushion shot 1. And the reason that I do shot -1 is because more often than not, you're going to come back and change your views later, and you don't want to delete your views. So just giving them a numeric suffix at the end of their view just helps you kind of navigate that a little bit more. So anyway, we can turn off that wallpaper now because we've got our main shot. We know that when we render it, it's going to align, and we're going to bring it into Photoshop to do the alignment part. But so we can get rid of that. We can get rid of the floor because all it's doing is acting as a white card to catch shadows. because that background was a carpet texture on the floor. We don't need to worry about reflections, so we can just get away with the carpet. So I'll hide that. Now, some people might say you want to add in a little bit of bump texture to make the shadow a little ripply. For our purposes, we can actually get away with doing that in post in Photoshop. And if you're doing something that needs to be hyper photorealistic, you might want to put a displacement map on your ground, but I'm not going to worry about that here. So let's break down the chair and kind of figure out what we want the materials to be. So I'm going to turn off everything except for the wheels to start with. Normally, wheels in office chairs are typically like a black cast plastic, and I think that's probably a good way to go. So I'm going to open up my material editor here and right click on scene and add a new material, add V-Ray material. And we're going to rename this wheel. Diffuse we know is black, but I wouldn't make it pure black. I'd make it like a charcoal sort of black. This is really just a taste thing where you might want them orange. It doesn't really matter. It's if you're the designer on it, you can kind of make that call sometimes. And I'm also going to add, if you expand in V-Ray, you can expand the material, and then you've got your channels here. And you'll recognize those names now: diffuse, emit, reflect, and refract from the materials making video. We're going to add in a reflection channel. And the nice thing is, I had mentioned about Fresnel reflections back when I did the material video. The cool thing is, in this version of V-Ray, when you create a reflection channel, it automatically gives you the Fresnel option put in place. And we're not going to deep dive into too much of this, but one thing I can tell you is right now, the highlight and the reflection glossiness, we don't need those at 1. We need those at like 0.5 and 0.6. And what I can do is I can actually update the preview of this, and it'll give me a good view of what that material is going to wind up looking like. Now, I don't want you to get intimidated by all these little check boxes and radio buttons and sliders and stuff. Like it's a lot easier than you think. If you see a capital M in this particular program, it means that something else is going on beyond just a normal reflection. In this case, we've got the Fresnel. If you see the lowercase m, that means that no mapping is happening in there. Anyway, I think that looks pretty good. I might just make that black just a little more rich and update that. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, it looks good. Maybe add just a wee bit more highlight gloss, maybe 0.7. Yeah, so you get a little specular highlight there. That looks good. And then we're going to close this for a second. Now, I'm going to select all of these, and I'm going to go to my properties window here, go Object, Materials, Plugin, because we're using V-Ray, and then Browse, and click on Wheels. And then sure enough, they're now the material applied of wheels. Now you can't see it because I'm in the shaded view, but if I go in a rendered preview, you can start to see, okay, those have started to take on that property. Not all materials that you build will have this sort of indication. Glass often looks black unless you're using the base Rhino render material settings, then it'll have a translucency to it. You won't see it here. So let's hide the wheels. Now let's move on to the legs. Now the legs, I really love these legs, and I think they're just freaking rad, and they need to pop. So I'm going to use the chrome texture that's actually built into these Express tools here, because it's pretty nice. And I'm just going to have the upper legs be this chrome. And see, this is what I was talking about. That doesn't look like chrome in the preview, but if I were to render it right now, it would come out chrome. And I'm just going to hide these upper portions of the leg for a second and we can get rid of those surfaces, and make these lower portions. What should those be? Maybe let's do like car paint red. Yeah, that'll look cool. What's happened in these Express tools is if I go to the material editor, now they're in here. So we've got our car paint red, and I can see all the cool stuff that's going on here. There's two reflection channels working together to make this work. I think what I might do is actually take the red reflection and maybe just bring it down just a little bit so we can update that and see what that looks like. Yeah, that's gonna look really nice. Might just add a little bit more reflection glossiness here and get that highlight a little hotter. Yeah, that's gonna look sweet. And we can actually preview render these. Okay, so I think that red, now that I'm looking at it, we're just gonna go red and see how cool we can get it. So we've got our legs taken. Now let's work on the tilt lock. So the tilt lock is that little dial on the bottom of office chairs. Now, typically those are pretty black too, but I think it'd be nice if it kind of related back to the tips of the legs, so that there was some matching going on. So let's duplicate the car color, and we're gonna rename this tilt lock. And while I'm doing that, rename that leg lower, and the chrome we'll rename leg upper. Okay, so the tilt lock, let's apply that material. And then, that's going to be cool. But I think I want to get rid of that secondary reflection channel, this reflection 1, because it's not going to be metal. It's going to be more of a cast rubber. So what we know about rubber is that it's a little more dead in its reflections. So we can bring the highlight glossiness way down to like 0.2, and it should have a little bit of reflection gloss, but not even that much, maybe 0.3. And I'm going to take the red out of the reflection channel, just so it's like a pure red. Diffuse, with the diffuse also has a Fresnel. That's one of the interesting things about the car paint textures that came with those Express tools, is they've got a lot of interesting stuff going on. So I want to actually just make this none, and that should make it pop. Yeah, that looks like a good red rubber, I think. Kind of a silicone, soft, like polyurethane silicone sort of thing. I dig it. Yeah, I think that'll work good. What is next is, let's take a look at what we've got here. So, at this point, I'm going to do a little test render just to see what that rendering looks like with those chrome legs. And, the one thing I'm noticing is the red, those reds don't match well. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to bring the tilt lock back to be the same color as the lowers, and just be done with it. That way everything kind of matches. Let's do another test render and see how that looks. Yeah, see, that's a nice color red. I really dig it. So the next thing is we want the base. The base needs a material, and we'll just make that the same as the wheels. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but I think that darker color will look good underneath the base of the chair, or underneath the sides of the chair. So these are going to be chrome. We don't even have to do that because we already have a chrome built, and we use that for the leg uppers, so we'll use that. And then those little screws, I think that those screws would look really cool if they were sort of a anodized red that also matched the tilt lock and the wheel lowers, so that red back in there. Yeah, so I'm going to take all these screws here of the parts of the frame, and also make those that same red. And the reason I'm doing that is to just bring some of that color back up in. And then we have the cushion. And with the cushion, I'm going to do something special for this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build a texture in Photoshop really quick. Make this 512 by 512. Now you can have textures be any size you want. I recommend this. It's really kind of dictated by the size of rendering that you're going to have. So I could make this a 1024 by 1024 texture, but because what I'm going to be doing is making a small tile that repeats itself around each component of the cushion, it doesn't make sense to make it any bigger because there's not going to be that much detail on it. So what I'll do is, I think the cushion itself is probably going to be more of a gray color, a really subtle red infused in there. And then I'm going to fill that, and then I'm going to give it a texture of noise. It's kind of hard to tell, but there's a nice bit of static going on in there. Now the other thing I want to do is create, I'm gonna put a red stripe right down the middle of this texture. All right, I'll make this texture like 9 pixels wide, maybe. Yeah, that's gonna be sweet. And this is gonna be a simulated seam, sort of. And I think let's go with maybe 5 or 6 here. Yeah, something like that. But I actually want to do it on a new layer because I'm going to do some additional effects to it. Maybe stroke it, and we'll take that stroke and make it just a little bit less black than that. And this will kind of look like an embossed seam. So I'm gonna flatten this and then save it. Just want to make sure. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna flatten this, make sure we're saving it to our maps directory. Actually, I'll keep it in this recording folder. Cushion seam. Okay, and then jump back into Rhino here, and let's hide everything but the cushions for a second. So we need to talk about mapping. So when you're mapping something, it's good to think about, especially when you're using basic mapping. We're not going to get into UV mapping. We need to figure out how we want to project this surface onto, or project the texture onto the surface. So we need to create a new texture. Material editors, add new material, rename that material cushions. And then in the diffuse, we're going to click that little M, go to bitmap, and then select on file, click that. And we're going to select our cushion seam. I'm going to click update. We've got a few options here. I'm just going to keep it as it is right now. And there are some tiling options, but we don't need to worry about that. You can see it came through okay, and I'm going to apply it. Now, one quick tip on this is that when you're building your files, you need to make them RGB. So if I go into the edit in Photoshop or image in Photoshop and go to mode, make sure it's checked on RGB. If it's on CMYK, when you go to click render in V-Ray, it'll crash it. Avoid that if you can. I don't know if they've corrected that in the newer versions, but I've came across that years ago and I've kind of stained it into my memory. Anyway, so when I hit plugin and I go to and browse and hit cushions and apply it, first thing you're going to notice is, okay, we've got a texture on there clearly, but where's our stripe? Oh, our stripe is like over here on this like surface here, and it's kind of diagonal over there. What's going on? Well, this is why we need to do a basic texture map job on this. And what we're going to do is go to texture mapping in the properties, show advanced UI, and we're going to add a planar texture. And what that did, I love it. I love it. What that did was it actually created a plane. If you imagine a projector just projecting that image straight onto the surface, um, what we have a slight issue though. We have to work with these. There's like a stretching of the map here. So what I want to do is actually go and select both of these components, hit show mapping, and it will actually show me where that texture is being, how that texture is being projected. So if I move this box around now, you can see it's going to move that line around in space. If I really wanted to get technical, I could do a box map, but the projection of just a planar projection is going to work fine. So I want to rotate this around. Essentially, everything's hitting as perpendicular to the surface as possible to minimize all that stretching of the map. And then the other thing I want to do, is I want to make sure that this bounding box is actually bounding to the edges left and right, and that way that I'll know that that surface is, or that projection is perfectly centering that seam on the center of the cushion, because of the way we built our file. And that looks pretty good. So now you can see I've corrected that stretching of the map that's going on. Now what about the sides? How do the sides look? Now the sides are not looking good. And that is because, remember, this whole projection is projecting right down on the surface. So all those pixels that are on the sides, the computer doesn't know what to do with them, so it just stretches them across that surface. Now, in our case, we actually have sides that are covering up a lot of that. It's not covering up these pockets. So, and I would like to correct for that. So what I can do is I'm going to turn off everything except the cushion again. And I'm actually going to explode this surface so that it's all of its unique components. And I'm going to grab all those surfaces and all these surfaces, and I'm going to join those together. I'll do this in shaded view so it's a little easier for you to see. So now the chair has the surfaces in the middle, which we can actually join those back together. Let me make sure that didn't mess up the mapping. Yep, we're good. And we don't need those, and we can just focus on these for a second. So what we can do is actually undo flattening this file for a second. We're going to get rid of that stripe and then save it as a secondary map. So we've got cushion seam. I'm just going to call this cushion sides, and click OK. And then come back into Rhino, and we're going to duplicate. We're going to go to Material Editor, go to Cushions, duplicate this, and rename it Cushion Sides. And we're going to go to our map channel, click the map, and then select the sides, and then click Apply. And then go to the render preview, and you can see it's still there. So what's the deal? Well, we have to correct the texture map itself, because this is still referring back to that other cushion texture map. So we need to delete that channel. Okay. Make sure that the material is now cushion sides, and then come back into the texture map and add another planar texture map. So we'll show the mapping again. Now we don't want it to be projecting straight down because it's doing the same thing it was doing before of stretching the material. So instead what we want to do is rotate this projection. And because it is a square file, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually make this these dimensions square. So I'm going to do it like an 18 by 18 square and see how that looks. Now, because it's a tiled pattern, you can see it's you're not going to see any sort of funky seams or anything. So that looks pretty good. And then I can just take these, because it applied, when you select multiple objects and apply a material to them, it kind of connects those objects together in a sense as far as the texture mapping goes. Now I could go back in and correct for that stretching that's going on, but I don't think even in our cushion shot one where we have that detail, the only area you're going to really see that are in these little pockets here. And I think that the lighting might disguise that enough that you'll be able to get away with it. I'm going to just take these and group them. Make sure you hide the texture mapping, show the cushion, select everything, and then group it together. So now it's kind of one object in a sense. The only thing of it is, in Rhino wasn't made for rendering. Rendering was sort of a secondary thought when they built the program. So there's a lot of little clumsy tricks like that you have to do as far as grouping. Now with texture mapping and other programs, it would actually unwrap this entire surface and you could just paint right on the top of it. But we don't need to worry about that, or we can't worry about that. So we needed to create some other sort of trick to get around it. And my favorite is just applying the material to the different areas and then grouping everything together so it acts as one unit. So let's take a look at what we've got here. We've got our wheels, we've got our legs, the base, the side lock, the sides, and I think that this is a pretty looking chair. Let's put it back into that main shot view, and we'll show the lights, the environment. Let's bring that back wallpaper back in just to make sure it's lining up still. Hide the floor for a second. Yeah, I think that's going to look pretty good. Now, actually, you know, I'm starting to look at it, and your legs would probably have a struggle between that desk and the bottom of the chair. So I might actually just bring this down just a little bit. I'm just putting it into its view so that way it looks right. And you could scale it down, but then you're going to mess with all of your dimensions, and you don't want to do that. So make sure that when you're adjusting your camera, which is the fifth element of setting up your scene, you're actually, you know, putting it together in a way that doesn't actually mess with the geometry itself. So I'm going to go into set view, name views, go back to main shot. I'm going to just save this shot and update it, because that's what I really meant to do. Okay, I think we're at a point now where we've got our scene set up. So I'm going to bring the floor back in. Let's just double check to make sure our lights are on, which they are. Yeah, that looks good. So in the next video, we're actually going to wrap this up by actually doing the rendering and show you how to bring this into KeyShot and do the rendering there too. The KeyShot setup is really snappy and quick, so it's not a huge time waster. Anyway, thanks so much guys for watching, and stay tuned for the next video. Have a great day.